Good evening.
Good evening.
Do you think I could have a word with Mr. Rose?
I'm afraid he's out.
Oh, is that a fact now? And me coming all this way in the hope of seeing him?
Well, he's gone to London for the evening. Could I help? I'm his secretary.
Yes, well, maybe you could. Might I come in?
Wouldn't it be better if you called again tomorrow?
I'm not sure I can do that. And I wanted to tell Mr. Rose something before anyone else did.
Tell him what?
Mr. Rose doesn't know me, but we have a mutual friend. A fellow he'd like to be put in touch with. And I can put him in touch.
What friend?
An escaped murderer. He killed a policeman 8 years ago. One of Mr. Rose's policemen.
Of course, you may well come to the conclusion, Charles, on the evidence before you, that a man of my age would be quite incapable of landing a salmon that size.
On the contrary, Sir Edward, I have every...
In that case, you would have no alternative but to dismiss my story as just another fisherman's yarn.
I wouldn't dream.
Nevertheless, there is the character of the witness to consider. A former judge. A man of quite unimpeachable veracity.
Unimpeachable, I believe.
And what's more, I have a witness. True, he is in my employ.
Sir Edward, I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed my dinner. As it happens,
enjoyed the dinner, did you?
Greatly.
What did you think of the brandy?
Excellent.
One of the noblest of the century.
I agree.
Now you're on your feet. Help yourself to some more, and buzz me the bottle.
You'd better come in.
Sure, but this is a nice place he's found for himself. Still, after all those years chasing villains, is entitled to take it easy. The good that man has done in his time.
Oh, yes?
In protecting society.
Through here.
Writing his memoirs now, they tell me.
That's right. Who is this murderer you know where to find?
Lambert.
Arthur Lambert.
You've heard of him, then?
Oh, Mr. Rose made notes on all his cases. Lambert was the man who killed...
Sergeant Cunliffe of Scotland Yard. Mr. Rose's favourite sergeant. Lambert was a clerk in those days at the firm of diamond merchants in the city of London. A pen pusher, the sort you never glance twice at.
Age 30. No previous convictions. Single. Lived with his mother in Purley.
Nobody. So when a gang of jewel thieves approached him with the notion that he might help them rob the firm's safe, well, he wouldn't be a nobody after that, if you follow me.
On being cautioned by Sergeant Cunliffe, he ran for his car and jumped into it.
Oh, yes, a big car on the HP. Trying to be somebody all the time, he was.
Sergeant Cunliffe stepped in front of the car to stop him.
But you wouldn't have believed that Arthur would hurt a fly.
Lambert drove straight at him. Cunliffe died in hospital 5 hours later.
And Arthur got clean away. Abandoned his car, mingled with the city crowds, most of them dressed exactly the same as he was.
How do you know all this?
I know Arthur, and I read the account in the papers.
But how do you know how he got away?
Didn't Arthur confess the whole thing to me, less than 3 hours ago?
And you came straight here?
It's a serious offense to conceal information about a wanted man. And I'm not one to put myself on the wrong side of the law.
Well, why didn't you go to the police?
I thought Mr. Rose would like to be the first to know. Oh, who are you calling?
Mr. Rose.
No. Not yet.
And if there's one subject on which I do pride myself I am something of an expert, it is, of course, the younger generation.
Yes.
In my considered opinion, and you know me well enough to know that my opinions are never less than considered.
Yes.
I was saying this to the Home Secretary just the other day. The biggest single cause in the present wave of juvenile delinquency is television. And do you know what he said to that?
Yes.
You can't know, you weren't there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant, I was listening.
I should hope you were.
For Bell.
Bells? What do you mean, bells?
Why shouldn't I ring him?
If Mr. Rose were here himself, it would be different. But I don't want telephone messages flying to and fro before I've explained the business deal.
What business deal?
There's still a reward of £1,000 for information leading to the arrest.
Which you want.
I'm not a greedy man. I'll go half with Mr. Rose, and he can take all the credit.
I suggest you leave here straight away and go to the police. You'll get the whole 1,000.
Mr. Rose would like to find the fellow that killed his sergeant.
You mean you daren't go to the police?
I am in a slight embarrassment.
You mean you've known for some time where Arthur Lambert was, without telling anyone?
Well, you see, I couldn't be certain.
You knew him, you could recognize him.
A great man for disguise, always shaving his eyebrows or dyeing his hair.
You knew him and you didn't tell. Why not?
Well, I travel the country a great deal. I'm in the junk business, buying and selling things. And 6 years ago in Birmingham, I ran into a man calling himself Arthur Warren, a clerk for some fly-by-night little property company.
And you knew he was Lambert?
I thought the face was familiar, and I said, "Aren't you Arthur Lambert?"
And what happened?
He didn't answer. But you know, just after that, he disappeared from Birmingham.
Why?
Now, isn't that interesting?
Is it?
It's the same question I asked himself when I met him again 2 years later. Why did you disappear from Birmingham, I said, and why have you now changed your name to Arthur Mulgrove? Just after his wedding it was.
His wedding?
I found out about it by accident, so I turned up.
Oh?
And soon after that, he was on the move again.
Again, without telling you?
Maybe he knew I'd catch up with him again sometime.
As you did?
Oh, yes, I did. In a little town in Gloucestershire, where he lives now.
But you say tonight he confessed to you. Why?
I don't think he cares any longer. He's broke. Can't even keep up the payment on the furniture. It's a funny thing, but ever since I've known him, Arthur never has been able to make both ends meet.
I imagine you've done all right.
Poor Arthur. Bills coming in at awkward times. Bills that have to be paid whether he likes it or not.
Your bills?
He'll be better off in prison. No bills to pay there. And after all the moving he's done, he'll be glad to settle down.
You've known all along who he was. You've been blackmailing him for 8 years, and now he's got nothing left.
He murdered a policeman, Miss
Lamb.
Lamb.
Blackmail is a crime, too.
So is slander. Is it a deal, then?
No.
Mr. Rose takes the credit of the 1,000, gives me 500, and keeps me out of trouble with the police. You'll put it to him.
He won't agree to it.
I'll call him up tomorrow or the next day.
If he takes my advice, you won't get 1 penny.
Mr. Rose is a man of honor.
Exactly.
And am I not one myself? I'll even trust him with this. The address of Lambert, otherwise Mulgrove, in Haverton, Gloucestershire.
And your own address?
My business card. Patrick O'Leary, junk merchant of London, East 1.
I'll give these to Mr. Rose. Both of them.
And I look forward to my share of the reward. Good night, Miss Lamb.
Good night.
Justice must be done, Miss Lamb.
I hope so.
Don't bother to see me out. I remember the way.
Nevertheless, I freely admit I have met one or two Armagnacs, particularly from the Basse Armagnac region, which are fully the equal of all but the finest cognacs.
Sir Edward, if I may...
And certainly the superior of any of your VSOPs, or so-called Napoleon brandies, which are so foolishly overpraised by the ignorant, who are laboring under the sad delusion that brandy ages in its bottle, which of course it does not.
Excuse me, Sir Edward, the telephone.
Hmm?
The telephone.
Oh. Don't you know it's 10 o'clock at night?
I wonder if I could speak to Mr. Rose.
Oh, you plainly have the wrong number, young lady. There is no one of that name living here. No, my name is... Gainsthorpe.
Sir Edward, is that by any chance my...
Oh, one moment. Of course. Your secretary.
At this hour. I do hope nothing has come up which, Rose here.
Look, I know you asked me to ring you and get you out of that place, but as it happens...
Good heavens. You don't say so, my dear. You did quite right to telephone me.
No, listen.
Hold on a moment. It looks as though I shall have to tear myself away.
What? Why?
My secretary has been attacked by a footpad.
Oh,
who has rifled her valuable vanity bag. Never mind, Drusilla. I'll be there as soon as I can.
3 o'clock in the morning.
We stopped at a coffee stall.
Or two.
On the way back.
Or sorted.
You smell of brandy.
Not me, I was driving.
No, him.
Well, yes, they were brandy stalls, too. Brandy and coffee clubs, sort of. My turn now. At last.
Why didn't you listen when I rang you?
The past is past. I'm listening now.
Well, this slimy Irish toad...
Mr. Patrick O'Leary.
It says Arthur Lambert is at that address.
8 Jubilee Villas, Haverton Glass.
O'Leary has been blackmailing him for years, milking him of everything he's got, and now that the milk cow is dry...
Calm yourself.
When I think of that hypocritical little worm...
I have often noticed in sentimental women there's a fury struggling to get out.
What?
But I thought in your case...
You would
Drusilla-
have felt the same if you'd been here.
I wish I had been.
To pin a medal on him?
Saturday. We must see that he's recompensed for his services
Services?
in helping to bring a murderer to justice.
He hasn't done it yet.
That's a point. Your move.
I suppose we shall have to get Inspector Dalby out of bed. Drusilla, would you mind...
You can damn well do it yourself.
Oh.
Mrs. Mulgrove,
Yes,
we have a word with your husband, please.
he's not in.
Well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning.
I haven't seen him since yesterday evening. Who are you?
We're police officers.
Police?
Is that a photograph of your husband, Mrs. Mulgrove?
Oh, what's happened?
Just tell us if that's your husband.
Taken a fair time ago, wasn't it?
It is your husband?
Yes, of course it is. Why?
She identified him at once. She hadn't seen him since yesterday evening, she said, but, well, according to the Haverton officers, there's no doubt at all, sir, that Arthur Mulgrove is Arthur Lambert.
At the time, I thought we'd get him in 8 seconds, and it took 8 years. Well, this calls for a bottle of champagne, I think.
It's a bit early for that.
At 10 o'clock in the morning, well, yes. Coffee, perhaps. John!
I simply meant that Arthur Lambert hasn't been caught yet.
I wouldn't be too sure of that, Miss Lamb.
You said his wife hadn't seen him since last night.
True.
Well, he obviously guessed what O'Leary was up to. He's probably out of the country by now.
Where the devil's John? First of all, he's not here to let Sergeant Dalby in. Oh, I am sorry. Inspector Dalby.
That's all right, sir.
Unforgivable.
Old habits die hard, I'm sure.
Well, Drusilla, in John's deplorable absence, perhaps you'll be so good as to... Oh, no. Not coffee.
I really can't stay, sir. Only looked in on my way to Haverton to keep you informed.
How do you know he didn't get away last night?
He telephoned his wife this morning.
Where from?
A local dial call. We couldn't trace it, but the police were still with her. One of them grabbed the phone.
Foolish fellow.
Heard something about Transport Cafe, then obviously Lambert panicked and cleared out.
When was this?
Just before 8.
2 hours ago.
A call went out for him at once, so I think it's been picked up by now. Well, thanks for all your help, Miss Lamb.
What about O'Leary?
Well, of course, he's been a help, too.
But what do you know about him?
Only what Mrs. Mulgrove told the Haverton police, that he'd been with her husband early yesterday evening, as O'Leary told you.
I imagine he was a regular visitor.
Oh, yes. She says he gave her the creeps, and her husband, too, but she never knew why.
Do you mean to say she had no idea at all?
Until this morning, she didn't know her husband could be blackmailed about anything. Goodbye.
Well, at least Lambert won't have any reason for keeping quiet now. Excuse me. Mr. Rose's secretary?
Well, you always did say you'd retire to the country to grow roses, didn't you, sir? But no one ever thought you really would.
I found that I often surprise people by doing exactly what I say I will.
It's for you, Inspector. Haverton, CID.
Thanks.
May I ask where you've been?
About my duties.
Don't they normally include answering the door when someone calls?
It depends who it is. You can't just let anybody in.
There's no doubt at all. Ah, yes. At once. Goodbye. They found Lambert.
Where?
He must have been driving like a maniac when he left that cafe this morning. He took a bend on a steep hill a lot too fast and went right over the edge. The car fell 60 feet with Lambert inside.
He's dead.
Very much so.
I'm very sorry about this, Mrs. Mulgrove. I'm afraid it's going to be rather a shock for you, but you do understand that we have to be sure that it is your husband.
I understand.
And I would like to explain it was a very bad accident. The car fell a long way with him inside it.
Let me see him. Oh.
I have to ask you this. Is that your husband?
Yes.
You definitely identify him as your husband, Arthur.
Oh, yes. Even with... Yes, that's Arthur.
Thank you, Mrs. Mulgrove. You've been very brave.
So, he slips through our grasp a second time.
It's hardly the same, is it?
8 years of being blackmailed and smashes himself to pieces. It almost makes you think that crime does not pay.
It paid for O'Leary.
True enough.
With Lambert dead, there'll be nothing to pin on that horrible little blackmailer, will there? He'll get clean away with it.
Rose here. Good morning, Mr. O'Leary. I was sorry I was out when you called last night. My secretary passed on the information that you so kindly left with her, which has, of course, proved correct. We're all very much in your debt over this. Well, what do you suggest would be in order, Mr. O'Leary? Yes, well, that sounds very reasonable. Of course, I shall have to make sure that I really am getting the £1,000. Would you care to call or telephone me, say, in a couple of days? I see. Of course. I'll wait till I hear from you.
How much did he ask for?
Drusilla, no.
Oh, it's monstrous.
He suggests that we share the £1,000, which seems very fair under the circumstances.
Fair?
For catching Cunliffe's murderer, that's the least he deserves. Besides, think how my book is going to benefit from this.
Your book?
Have you forgotten that I'm writing my memoir?
Haven't you?
Certainly not. I'm constantly turning over phrases in my mind of a most telling nature. And now, thanks to O'Leary, what a tale we can unfold about Lambert now.
Ending with the thrilling climax of his violent death.
Except that's not, I believe, the end of the drama.
What would you call it, then?
Lambert's death? Oh, I think it's certainly no more than, well, the end of Act One.
It's Chief Inspector Rose, isn't it? You were in charge of the original investigation.
It was your sergeant, wasn't he, murdered?
No, Peter, now then, you're not in here. Very well, you're not allowed in here.
Have you come out of retirement to help us with the case, sir?
No comment.
Come on, out of here, all the lot of you.
Good morning, Sergeant. I understand that Inspector Aubrey from the yard is here. He is expecting me. Charles Road.
Yes, sir. Now then, clear off, you lot, before I book the lot of you.
All right, sir. Sergeant, get a car, take Mrs. Mulgrove home.
Oh, Mr. Mulgrove, I'm from the Globe.
Mr. Mulgrove, this way.
Had you no idea at all how it really was?
Get these fellas out of here, Sergeant.
What did he tell you?
How does it feel to be married to a murderer? Our readers would so like to know. Oh, that poor woman.
Oh, you're very punctual, sir.
Are you quite sure you're free?
Perfectly, sir.
Good. I do so dislike being interrupted.
Oh, sir, I'm trying to get Mrs. Mulgrove away without the press going after her, but they've nipped round the back now, blast them.
Why not slip her out through the front?
Well, they just follow the car in, sir.
Let my secretary drive Mrs. Mulgrove home. I'm sure Miss Lamb would like to be of some assistance to that. Poor woman. She did look rather overcome.
Yes, she doesn't know what's hit her, sir. First she hears her husband's a killer, and then that he's been killed himself. All within a couple of hours.
And then she had to view the remains.
The body?
Remains is more apt, sir, not a pretty sight.
If there is anything I could do...
Why not introduce my secretary to Mrs. Mulgrove? See how she takes the idea.
Yes, all right. Would you come this way, sir?
Thank you.
Come along in, sir.
I do hope I'm not interrupting.
Of course not, sir.
Thank you. I should hate to be thought of as an old hunter put out to grass who whinnies still at the cry of hounds.
If we'd lost the scent, and I thought that...
You'd be too polite to throw me out, but too human not to want to.
None at all, sir. Just that we've got our fox. The hunt is over.
Of course, but unfortunately I have to write about the chase in my book. And I'd be enormously grateful if you could just fill me in on one or two trivial details.
Certainly, sir. What can I tell you?
What was Lambert doing at that cafe at 8 o'clock in the morning yesterday, and where did he spend the night? And why is O'Leary so anxious to share the reward with me? Oh, and when and from whom did O'Leary buy that shop in Whitechapel? All purely for my book, you understand.
Yes, sir?
I do hope I didn't disturb you.
No, sir. Just the one night, sir. Most people stay just the one night.
As long as that.
Hmm?
As a matter of fact, I was just making some inquiries about a friend of mine who stayed here. A Mr. Patrick O'Leary of 17 Bishop Street, East 1.
Irish bloke, wasn't he?
I had an appointment with him in the town on Wednesday night. He didn't turn up. Did he eat at the hotel that night?
Oh, no. I'd have noticed if anyone had done that.
You mean the food not too good?
I wouldn't know. There's the menu. Oh, well, remember, he did have a look at it.
Sounds better of it.
Not really hungry, he said.
I can understand.
So he went out.
Could you tell me what time he got back?
I don't know. He was here next morning when he booked out. Early it was. Asked the way to some cafe. That wasn't where you was meeting him, was it?
And what cafe would that be now?
Some transport cafe on the Swindon Road. Said he was meeting someone there at 8 for breakfast.
Me compliments to the chef. Me gob.
Did O'Leary ever write to your husband?
I don't know.
If we could just find something incriminating. Something that would give the police enough evidence.
That O'Leary won't bring my Arthur back, will he? No one could. It made me identify him. You know, what was left of him. It was horrible.
You poor thing.
Is that your husband, Arthur? Well, of course I could see it was. I'd have known him anywhere. I can't describe to you the state he was in.
It wouldn't have happened if it weren't for O'Leary. Whatever your husband did 8 years ago, he's tried to make up for it ever since. I don't see why that revolting Irishman should get away with it. Shall I go?
It'll just be those blessed reporters again. Been on at me all day, they have.
Mrs. Mulgrove, when O'Leary came here that evening, didn't you hear anything of what he said to your husband?
Well, I went out as soon as he came. And when I got back, they'd gone. Both of them. All I found was a note from Arthur. Taken car, it said. May not be back till morning.
Were you worried?
Of course I was worried. He's never done anything like that before. Next morning, I was just wondering whether to ring the police about him. Then what happens? There they are at the door. With his picture. Arthur Lambert, they said. Wanted for murder. Lambert, they called him. I didn't even know his real name.
You've got to get away, Mrs. Mulgrove. You can't stay here on your own.
Where can I go?
Well, I suppose that Miss Lamb is right about O'Leary.
She's convinced she is.
Well, then he probably called on Lambert that evening to collect some more money.
Told him to bring it to the cafe in the morning.
I suppose so. Lambert spent the night trying to raise it.
O'Leary knew that he wouldn't be able to.
So he decides to shop him and therefore doesn't bother to turn up at the cafe to collect it.
Or does turn up, but Lambert's already panicked and left.
That's possible too.
Well, you can hardly bring O'Leary in for questioning simply because my secretary has taken a violent dislike to him. So I shall have to wait until I can speak to him myself.
I think I'd give you a chance, sir.
He has already telephoned. He left his address with my secretary the other night.
Oh, for a blackmailer, he's very forthcoming about himself.
He even made a point of letting my secretary know that he was a blackmailer. Oh, a very honest villain indeed.
Who's that? Is that another reporter, Sergeant?
Well, he certainly seems to be a newspaper man.
He's waiting for you, sir. Mr. Halifax.
Haven't I seen him somewhere before, sir?
Oh, most unlikely. He makes a point of steering clear of policemen. Well, thank you, Dolby. Remember to all my colleagues at the Yard. Tell them I mention them all in my book if I possibly can, and most of them favorably.
I'm sure they're all looking forward to reading it one day, sir.
How nice. I'm certainly looking forward to writing it one day.
I see Lady Cynthia Jubb has got engaged.
I must remember to drop her mother a note.
To a hotel porter?
Oh, dear.
Not the one I've just been talking to, I'm quite sure. At the Regina Private Hotel, so-called.
Where O'Leary stayed.
And incredibly survived. A real morgue.
The sort you wouldn't be seen dead in.
Not unless I had the misfortune to stay there.
Did you find out what he did on Wednesday night?
All I know is, in the morning, he asked the porter the way to the transport cafe. He had an appointment there at 8.
As I thought. Well, we must hail a taxi.
Have we lost the car?
To Drusilla, for an errand of mercy for which, for the good of her soul, she should be rescued as soon as possible.
Mr. Halifax, you said?
You know him, sir?
Yeah, from somewhere, but can't quite place him now.
Aren't I allowed to feel sorry for her after what she's been through?
Well, perhaps you should have asked her to come and stay for a few days.
I did.
I'm sure John wouldn't mind it. Drusilla.
Oh, it's all right. She wouldn't hear of it.
Oh, say.
You know, she told me that he'd been thinking for some time of trying to get away. He'd parted his hair on the other side and put on glasses and said that if he changed his name as well and they moved to another district...
What reason did he give?
Oh, they're creditors. They owed hundreds.
What was his explanation for that?
Oh, he just wouldn't tell her. She thought perhaps he had a mistress somewhere or threw it all away on the horses. That's what upsets her. The way she misjudged him.
Thinking him a gambler and a libertine, when really he was nothing but a murderer. You found no letter from O'Leary, nor anything at all incriminating.
I had a good look.
I imagined you would.
Is that why you sent me there?
Just a long shot.
No, there was nothing. I went right through it. My God!
The telephone, Drusilla.
Mr. Rose's residence?
It's O'Leary. He wants his fee, as he calls it, to be sent to him by registered post.
Who is it, John?
Sunday World. They want to know if it was you who tipped off the yard about Lambert.
Say yes.
Yes. Who tipped you off?
Nobody.
Nobody. Somebody must have. Some blackmailer, perhaps?
Rubbish. No one was blackmailing Lambert so far as I know. Certainly you can quote me. I should positively like you to. How? By logical deduction, thinking it out.
A clue here, a clue there.
Fitting all the pieces together.
Like a jigsaw?
Till eventually the picture
begins to emerge.
Reveals itself. I hope you won't think I'm a bore if I were to ask you to telephone me later and I'll give you a full story then. I really am rather busy now. Front page. Splendid. I shall be able to read it on my flight to Nice on Sunday. We all are. A few days' holiday. Of course.
Holiday.
We all are.
Rose gets his man. Even in retirement, ex-Chief Inspector Rose, whose memoirs are shortly to be serialized in the Sunday World,
If they ever get written.
is still tracking down criminals.
So that's what happened.
It was entirely due to him that Arthur Lambert...
Entirely due to you?
It was, I believe, I who gave Dalbury the necessary information. And since O'Leary wishes me to take all the credit myself...
Reluctantly, you will.
That is what he'll believe I'm doing when he reads it in the paper. People do. With luck, he will assume the police know nothing about it. And if I see that our little holiday in Nice is featured in the paper, too...
I love Nice.
He will get the impression, the mistaken impression, that we're going to be away.
Oh, well, it was a lovely thought.
Drusilla, take a letter.
What if he reads the Observer?
I promised the world a story, not an exclusive. Dear Mr. O'Leary, thank you for your letter asking for your fee to be sent to you. I shall receive the money on Sunday, but I must point out, in my opinion, I think it rather dangerous to send such a considerable sum by post. Therefore, I shall leave it for you in cash in my greenhouse for you to collect.
Safe as the Bank of England, of course.
In a seed box covered with a light dusting of soil and labelled...
Forget-me-nots.
Forget-me-nots. I should like to hand you the money myself, but unfortunately, the house will be empty from Sunday afternoon onwards, as I'm going abroad with my entire household staff.
Household cavalry?
Would you please collect it before Monday, as I should hate for my gardener to have temptation put in his way. Yours gratefully, Charles Rose.
You really think he'll come?
If, for such a considerable sum so fairly offered, he's not prepared to take the risk.
What risk? He knows that with Lambert dead, no one can touch him for blackmail.
Not blackmail, certainly.
So, what's he got to be afraid of?
That we may be able to touch him for murder.
You're coming on. Good morning, Drusilla.
Why are you awake at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning?
There may not be time for watering later on. Is that the Sunday World you have in your hand?
Yes, it has a flattering picture of you tending your roses. Retirement is no bed of roses for Chief Inspector Rose.
Oh, how I hate that pun.
See page 2.
Page 2.
That's where the story is.
What world-shattering event, earthquake or avalanche, has relegated me to page 2?
Somebody's had Quins. But at least you have most of page 2 to yourself. Yard tipped off by ex-chief inspector. Deductions in Rose Garden.
Spare me.
It's all there, look, including our forthcoming holiday in Nice. Shall we go into breakfast?
If it's ready.
It should be. John was up hours ago.
John has gone to Haverton.
What?
We have a great deal of work to get through before this evening, Drusilla. And after you've cleared away the breakfast...
Me?
And done the washing up, I shall want you to make some telephone calls. After that, I shall go down to the local and relax and spread it round that we're off on our hogs this afternoon.
I imagine I'm allowed to go with you to the pub.
Well, I don't really see how you're going to fit it in.
Busy making phone calls.
Busy getting lunch.
Lunch?
John won't be back till 4 at the earliest.
I haven't done any cooking for months.
You've had a bit of practice by then.
Practice?
Getting breakfast.
You a copper?
Just to answer the question, would you please, sir?
Well, I don't know what time he got in that night. Must have been by 10:30, otherwise I'd have to let him in.
Is that when the hotel shuts, 10:30?
Some of us has to get our sleep, you know. This isn't a blooming Ritz.
What makes you think they don't sleep at the Ritz?
Rose here.
Dalby, sir. I've got that information you asked for. O'Leary acquired that business in Whitechapel in March 1959 from the executors of a man called Levitsky, who died in November 1958. That means the premises were unoccupied for nearly 5 months. Is that what you wanted to know?
It is. And if you want to know why I want to know, I suggest you set off in a fast police car and get here in time for lunch.
Is that John?
I cannot possibly explain on the telephone, but I want someone to make an arrest later on in the day, and I was rather it were you than our village bobby. A credit to the force, though he may be. Yes, as soon as possible. What did you want John for, Drusilla?
I can't find any basil.
Any what?
Basil, you know, the herb. I'm trying something rather elaborate.
Oh, my dear, is that wise?
Well, it is one of the dishes I cooked for my diploma.
What diploma was that? Cordon bleu?
The domestic science course I did at my finishing school. I got a highly commended for it.
Not even a prize.
It went a bit lumpy in the middle.
A bit lumpy in the middle.
Well, I'm bound to be a bit out of practice, you know. John doesn't even allow me in the kitchen.
I'm beginning to share his anxieties. Should we telephone him, Drusilla? I believe I know where he is.
No. I have my pride.
Oh, well, make sure there's enough for 3, won't you? Inspector Dalby's on his way.
Is there anyone else you've invited?
Well, of course, he may bring his sergeant, but I dare say he can take pot luck in the kitchen.
What sort of luck do you think you'll be taking?
Rose here.
The porter says he must have been back at the hotel that night before 10:30. But as he was with Drusilla 80 miles away at 10 o'clock, he must have driven back in a beat-up old estate car at nearly 200 miles an hour. Do you think we could get him for speeding?
Murdered? He thinks Lambert was murdered? By whom?
By O'Leary. Didn't Mr. Rose tell you?
Well, he said it explained when we got here.
Well, he's round at the local at the moment, but he won't be long, I'm sure. Would you like a drink?
No thanks.
I always did think it a lucky coincidence for O'Leary that Lambert got killed when he did. I mean, he wouldn't have kept quiet about O'Leary's blackmailing once you got hold of him.
So O'Leary silenced him?
Well, he drove off to that cafe as soon as he left his hotel that morning.
But he never arrived.
Because just as he was driving up, he saw Lambert driving away.
And went after him?
But of course, they had an appointment. O'Leary caught Lambert up on that hill. He stopped him, talked to him, killed him, put the body in the car.
Some detective work is required in the kitchen to trace the source of this curious aroma.
Oh, excuse me.
You think Lambert's death was no accident, sir?
I'm sure it wasn't.
Any evidence, sir?
Oddly enough, yes.
So you think our villain won't get this far?
Dalby's been in touch with the Whitechapel police. They're sitting on his doorstep waiting for him.
If he's on his way here...
A call has gone out for his car. However, if he does get through, we shall proceed as planned. Ah, forget-me-nots.
Afternoon, sir. I be John Halifax, master's serving man.
Who is that, sir?
A Shropshire lad. Any news?
Well, they found their estate car of O'Leary's. He sold it to a dealer yesterday morning.
Not, I imagine, in Whitechapel.
Brixton, for cash.
Cash?
I reckon he needs it.
Yes. Add that to what he hopes to get here. I wonder,
Sir?
whether we ought to put the £500 in this box.
I'm going to nab him just as soon as he shows up, sir.
If nothing goes wrong.
Well, it can. As I see it, we lock up your house, drive off in your car.
I nod graciously to any villagers we may find.
Transfer to my car, return by the lane, get back into the house unseen.
Through the scullery window, do you think?
The back door will do, sir.
Meanwhile, while we're waiting, I really must talk to poor Drusilla. Her thinking is as wayward as her cuisine.
It sounds very ambitious.
It turned out all right in the end.
You must give me the recipe.
Only the teeniest bit lumpy in the middle, really.
Did he like it?
He ate it.
And his verdict?
Highly commended.
Dolby and Sergeant Matheson are on watch upstairs. They have a clearer field of view of the greenhouse from there.
I wonder if he was here when we drove off, hanging about somewhere, just to make sure that we really did leave.
Drusilla, the time has come to puncture some of your romantic illusions.
About what?
I promise to let you down as gently as possible. John, did Lambert do 8 years ago after he had killed Cunliffe, abandoned his car in Hatton Garden, and lost himself amongst the rush hour crowd?
He made his way to a hideout he'd been carefully reconnoitering for weeks.
He was a cautious young man, Drusilla. He was known in the office as someone who hedged his bets.
I read that in your notes.
So he was hardly likely to get involved in a major crime without taking the precaution of preparing an escape route in case anything went wrong.
An empty shop at 17 Bishop Street, Whitechapel.
Which I assume he visited daily to lay in provision.
Always late home these days, said his mother. Where does he go after work? It was in your notes.
And I thought I had no sergeant these days. Thank you, Drusilla.
Anyway, there he hid for at least 2 months until the shop's new owner discovered him, a Mr. Patrick O'Leary.
Who turned the situation to his own advantage. Well, that doesn't puncture my illusions. From then on, he never let Lambert go.
Correct.
He squeezed him for 8 years, until finally, the other night...
He tried to wring out the last drop.
Correct.
At that point, however, Drusilla, something happened.
Would he knock?
To make quite sure we really had gone.
In that case...
It's not him after all, sir.
Who then?
No, I can't bear it. She's come to stay.
Doesn't she read her Sunday papers? Doesn't she know we're in Nice?
Drusilla.
If we don't stop her wandering about the garden, she'll bump into O'Leary.
She is not simply wandering around the garden, Drusilla.
She's going very purposefully towards the greenhouse. Only one man could have told her where the money was, and she loves him.
Do you mean that she and O'Leary, between them?
We should have anticipated this.
She keeps looking at her watch. What's she worried about? She's going off, walking towards the gate.
She'll be back.
Back?
To fetch her suitcase, which is outside the front door. John, I wonder if you could stretch your imagination sufficiently far as to pretend to be in love with me.
Of course, darling. Anything you say.
Rose's letter may very well be a trap, so I can hardly risk getting the money myself. She'll have to get it for me.
But, sweetheart, if Rose is there...
Well, just say I've come to stay, that you've accepted the kind-hearted girl's invitation.
And if the house is empty?
They go to the greenhouse, collect the money, and bring it to me on the bus.
Bus? What bus?
One got in from Henley 2 minutes ago. They turn round here, don't they? How long does it take?
5 or 6 minutes at least.
But he's in for a surprise, Dolby. She's going to meet him without the money.
I can't find it anywhere, darling.
He swore it was there, in the greenhouse.
Come and look for yourself. It's quite safe. There's no one at home. Come on.
That's all very well, but what if they don't?
They have. They're coming up the path now, both of them.
Logical deduction. Thinking it out.
Guesswork.
They're going towards the greenhouse.
Dolby.
Well, look for yourself if you don't believe me. I'll go and get my case and come back.
Mrs. Mulgrove, I'm a police officer.
Oh. Are you a friend of Mr. Rose's? Well, I'm trying to find Miss Lamb, Mr. Rose's secretary. She invited me to stay.
If you wouldn't mind coming with me, madam, we've one or two questions we'd like to put to you.
What about? I'm trying to find Miss Lamb. She said she'd put me up for a few days.
But I don't understand. How could she?
Come on. I'll show you.
Looking for something.
What sort of a trick is this? Tell me that. £500, we said, my share of the reward. You'll be away, you said.
Our plans were changed. There was no need to leave the money here. Come up to the house and get it. A friend and former colleague of mine from the yard, Inspector Dalby.
I have to warn you that anything you say may be taken down and used in evidence.
Just a minute. Is he arresting me for helping to turn in a murderer, is it?
Is he trying to fool me with that stage Irish accent of yours, is it? My secretary, perhaps, but don't try it on me, Lambert.
Lambert?
The romantic Ireland's dead and gone. It's with O'Leary in the grave.
When I played O'Leary for you the other night, Miss Lamb, you thought I was a real swine, didn't you? But I'll tell you something. That's nothing to what O'Leary himself was like. May he burn in hell.
May you also get what you deserve.
It was really O'Leary who died in that car.
O'Leary drove to the cafe in the morning for his meeting with Lambert, just as you said, Drusilla, and just as you said. Lambert drove off as soon as he arrived, but he drove off deliberately, knowing that O'Leary would follow. And later, at a spot chosen by Lambert, the two of them did meet, just as you thought they did. But it was Lambert, not O'Leary, who did the killing.
And his wife. She must have known all the time. Even when I was with her.
Drusilla.
The file on Lambert would really have been closed if he'd got away with it, wouldn't it? And with O'Leary out of the way as well, he would have been completely free.
8 years of it, then the worm turned.
Why on earth did he risk coming here today?
He had to. He had to behave exactly as O'Leary would have done. If he hadn't asked for payment or come to collect it when offered, we'd have been more than just suspicious. That's why he sold O'Leary's car so openly. That's why he phoned us, wrote to us, to make us believe O'Leary was still alive.
When I think how that woman fooled me.
A lamb to the slaughter.
It may very well be, Drusilla, that she knew nothing about it, till Lambert telephoned her yesterday like a voice from another world.
Did he telephone her?
To tell her about the forget-me-nots.
Oh, yes. Well, perhaps.
She identified his body.
He did fall from a very great height.
Well, he was smashed up bad enough for the police not to realize it wasn't Lambert, but his own wife.
I did promise Drusilla that I'd let her down gently, John.
What is she doing out there?
It would seem as if she's cooking supper.